Hello everybody, I'm Adithi and I'm going to be dealing with anatomy today. This happens to be my first video on here actually, so I hope you like it. So we're going to be dealing with back of the thigh and sciatic nerve today. So what do we know about back of the thigh? So the first thing that we would have to know would be that it is the flexor compartment of the lower limb. So let's come to the contents of the back of the thigh. So the most important content here, the muscles are called the hamstring muscles and the short head of biceps femoris, which is not included with the hamstring muscles. The reason for which we will see in the forthcoming slides. So the chief nerve that supplies that supplies these hamstring muscles, which happens to be the sciatic nerve, and we also see arterial anastomosis on the back of the thigh. So these are the contents of the back of the thigh. So the hamstring muscles, as we have learned, are the chief muscles of the back of the thigh. But what are these muscles? What constitute these muscles? So it consists of, first thing would be semimembranosus, then semitendinosus, so two semi muscles, then long head of biceps femoris but not short head, remember that, and the ischial head of the adductor magnus muscle, which we have already dealt with in the medial compartment of the thigh. So we have two semi muscles and we have biceps femoris long head. We can associate it with biceps brachii, which we have learned in the upper arm. So femoris here because it's obviously in the thigh, which has the femur, and ischial head of adductor magnus. Now let's take a look at the positioning of the muscles. So this is the sartorius muscle. This is the sartorius muscle, right? Here. Now then we have the gracilis muscle. Gracilis is from the adductor compartment, sartorius from the anterior. So first we have the semimembranosus, then we have the semitendinosus, and we have the long head of biceps femoris, and the adductor magnus ischial part happens to be in a deep layer, which I am unable to show you because animations are not very clear here. So but not the short head. Remember, short head is not a hamstring muscle. So we saw the positioning. Now, why are they grouped? So why do we call them hamstring muscles? They obviously must have something in common for them to be grouped as such. So when we think of a muscle, we think of mainly four criteria: origin, insertion, nerve supply, and action. So these are the four things that are somewhat common in these hamstring muscles. So origin, they all arise from the ischial tuberosity. So all of their origin is in the ischial tuberosity, which makes our answering a little easier, you could say. Now, they all must be inserted to common area. So they're all inserted into one of the bones of the leg, not of the thigh, of the leg. So not the femur. They're going to be inserted either onto the tibia or the fibula, right? So bones of the leg. So they cross the knee joint. So they are obviously going to influence the action of the knee joint. We'll see how. Then coming to the nerve supply, they are all supplied by the tibial part of the sciatic nerve. Then action, so it crosses the knee joint mostly, and also the hip joint, only one of the muscles. So it's going to be it's on the flexor compartment, so it's going to be a chief flexor of the knee joint and a weak extensor of the hip joint. Okay, so they are grouped so because they have these four things in common, and as we go one by one along each muscle, we will see all this and we will link them together. So now we're going to take a look at the bony attachments of these muscles, which is very important for us. So let's take a look. This is the hip bone and this is the vertebra, obviously. Now this is the anterior view, whereas this is the posterior view. We figure out this is the anterior view because we see the patella here, okay? And so this is the posterior view. We are more concerned with the posterior view of things rather. So this is the hip bone. This we know is the femur. This thick bone is going to be the tibia and the thin bone is going to be the fibula, okay? So the part that we are most concerned with in this particular part of our anatomy is the ischial tuberosity. This forms the ischial tuberosity. Now let's take a look at each of these muscles one by one. So the first one is going to be semimembranosus. Now if we are going to split the word semimembranosus, we are going to see that it is half membranous. So the upper half of the tendon here is membranous and it lies deep to the semitendinosus. So the relative positions of the muscles will be quite important for us during discussion as well. So I suggest you pay extra attention in dissection. So it lies deep to the semitendinosus. Next, we are concerned with the origin. So you don't want to get confused with the origin. So I would suggest you don't learn it as a sentence, but instead break it down and think and visualize where the origin is actually located. So we know that it's a hamstring muscle, so it's obviously going to be on the ischial tuberosity. But where on the ischial tuberosity? So there is a quadrilateral area on the ischial tuberosity where the semimembranosus muscle arises from. And where on the quadrilateral area? Because again, there are quite a few muscles in this region. So the upper lateral part of the quadrilateral area. So we will visualize this in a minute. First, let's go to the insertion. So the insertion, again, we're going to break it down. The insertion is obviously going to be into one of the bones of the leg, but which one? Is going to be a tibia. So semimembranosus is inserted onto the tibia. Oh, where on the tibia? It's going to be obviously at the back of the tibia. So it's going to be on the back of the medial condyle of the tibia in a horizontal groove. So the insertion of semimembranosus is going to be the horizontal groove on the back of the medial condyle of the tibia. So the nerve supply is something I hope you're all saying along right now, which is the tibial part of the sciatic nerve, which is a characteristic feature. So now let's visualize the origin and insertion on the particular bony attachments that we know. So we saw that this is the ischial tuberosity. Now we are concerned with this quadrilateral area on the ischial tuberosity, which is upper and lateral. So obviously it has to be the one that I am pointing at here, right? So this is going to be the semimembranosus origin. So now let's take a look at the insertion of semimembranosus. Now there is a blue color here, which I'm sorry I'm not able to give you very clearly. You can always find the illustration in Netter's Atlas. So the back of the medial condyle, obviously this is the posterior view, so this is going to be the back of the medial condyle. So this is where semimembranosus is attached. So it's coming from here all the way till here. So this is how the semimembranosus is going to be, and the upper half is going to be membranous. Now let's take a look at semitendinosus muscle. So semitendinosus, as we know, it lies over the semimembranosus and the lower half is tendinous. That the upper half happened to be membranous. Here the lower half is tendinous. So coming to the origin, so it's important to note here that it arises along with the long head of biceps femoris. So it's going to be on the ischial tuberosity like all hamstring muscles. Where on the ischial tuberosity? The upper quadrilateral area as well. So where specifically on this upper quadrilateral area? Because we already saw that the semimembranosus also arises from this area roughly. So in the upper quadrilateral area, the upper lateral part is occupied by the semimembranosus. So the lower medial part is going to be occupied by the semitendinosus muscles origin. Now let's take a look at the insertion of the semitendinosus. It's going to be inserted onto one of the bones of the leg. Which one? The medial, the tibia again, but the medial surface of the tibia. That was inserted onto the back of the medial condyle. So the medial surface of the tibia behind the insertion of the sartorius and gracilis, as we will visualize now. Then the nerve supply, as we know, is going to be tibial part of the sciatic nerve. Now visualize it on here. So we already located the ischial tuberosity. We have seen the quadrilateral area, right? So the lower medial part here, this is going to be the common origin for both semitendinosus and the biceps femoris muscle. Now let's take a look at the insertion here. So it said it's going to be on the medial surface. So let's take a look at the anterior view, which gives us a better idea here, right? So this is going to be the sartorius and gracilis muscles, and the one at the back here, right? So this is going to be the insertion of the semitendinosus behind the insertion of sartorius and gracilis. So now we're going to take a look at the next muscle, which is the biceps femoris. So biceps, which means that it's going to have two heads. So the origin are going to be two. So first one is going to be obviously the long head. So the long head we know is a hamstring muscle, so it's going to come from the ischial tuberosity. It's also going to come from the quadrilateral area on the medial part, along with the semitendinosus origin, and it also takes origin from a part of the sacrotuberous ligament as well. Now the short head of the biceps femoris is going to come from the linea aspera. Locate the linea aspera on the bone, and the lateral lip of the linea aspera and the lower part of the lateral lip of the linea aspera. I hope you're visualizing this in your brain. We'll take a look at it nevertheless. So the insertion. So what's going to happen is the two heads are going to unite and they're going to form a conjoint tendon. Now this conjoint tendon is going to be inserted onto the head of the fibula in front of the styloid process. So we saw the semitendinosus, semimembranosus are inserted onto the tibia, whereas this is going to be inserted onto the fibula in front of the styloid process. The nerve supply, I hope you're saying it with me. The long head is going to have the nerve supply of tibial part of sciatic nerve, whereas the short head is going to be from the common peroneal part of the sciatic nerve. So we have seen that this is the ischial tuberosity. We already took this as the semitendinosus and the biceps femoris origin, right? So now let's take a look at the insertion. So the insertion is going to be onto the fibula here in front of the styloid process. It's going to be inserted as a conjoint tendon. We're obviously taking the anterior view here. So basically it curves around and it comes like this. So that's going to be how the biceps femoris is going to look roughly. So now we come to the last muscle of the back of the thigh and the last hamstring muscle also, which is the adductor magnus. Now I'm sure you're wondering, this happens to be a muscle of the medial compartment of the leg. How has it ended up here amongst the hamstring muscles? So the ischial head of the adductor magnus actually happens to be a hamstring muscle. So the origin of the ischial head is going to be from the ischial tuberosity, the inferolateral part. Now the insertion, as we can all recollect from the medial compartment, is going to be the adductor tubercle. Now, one hack you can remember here is that even though it's a hamstring part and not the adductor part, it is inserted onto the adductor tubercle. So sometimes your teachers might try to confuse you, asking you which part or which head of the adductor magnus is actually the hamstring part. It is the one that is inserted into the adductor tubercle, ironically, I would say. Now, I'm sure you're also wondering that despite the fact that it is inserted onto the adductor tubercle, which is on the femur, mind you, not on any of the bones of the leg, how is it coming under hamstring muscle? It's not meeting one of the criteria, isn't it? So here's an interesting point for you. So the tibial collateral ligament of the knee joint, it morphologically represents the degenerated tendon of this muscle. So we're going to assume the tibial collateral ligament to be a representation of the tendon of this particular adductor magnus extending up till the tibia. However, it's been degenerated over time, so we're only morphologically going to represent it as such, even though it's not actually being inserted on there. So the nerve supply, I'm sure you're all saying it with me, tibial part of sciatic nerve. So that's all about the adductor magnus. Diagrammatically, so we already saw that this is the semimembranosus, this is the semitendinosus. Now, if we take a look at this area, this is going to be the adductor magnus, ischial part of the adductor magnus. Now this will again become the obturator internus, the one above it, mind you. And this side, I'm sure you're wondering what this muscle is going to be. That's going to be for the quadratic femoris, just so that you don't get confused. So we saw the origin, which came from here, right? And coming to the insertion, it's on the adductor tubercle of the femur. So this blue area here, this is where the adductor magnus is actually getting inserted here, right? So now we've completed all the muscles. Let's take a look at the action, the common actions that they're going to have. We've already discussed that it's a chief flexor of the knee and a weak extensor of the hip joint. Hip extensors while walking on flat ground. So they're going to be extensors of the hip, especially when we're walking on flat ground, when the gluteus maximus exercise happens to be minimal. Now, I'm sure if you've gone on a treadmill and you've run on it for a long time, you've felt a particular pull on the back of your thigh, because when you're walking on flat ground, that is. And if you take an incline where you're walking uphill, you'll feel more of that pressure in your gluteus maximus muscle and the gluteal region as such. So if you exercise regularly, I hope you start noticing these things about yourself as well. So what it does, and another action of it happens to be that it restricts the range of motion of hip flexion when the knee is extended. Now, this is a very common exercise that I'm sure every single one of you has had to do at one point or the other, where you're asked to bend down and touch your toes without bending your knees. This is a very, very common exercise that we were all made to do, and this is known as toe touching basically. So this is to exercise or stretch your hamstring muscles. So the next time you do this, please to remember your anatomy part. So let's take a look of it diagrammatically, the movements that it allows. So you see the flexion of the knee here, right? So this is the flexion of the knee. Right, so this is the flexion of the knee. It's going up here now. And this is toe touching, the one I was talking about. This can also be done while sitting. So next time you're doing this, do remember your anatomy. Why are we learning about these hamstring muscles? What's their clinical significance, so to speak? So if a person's hamstring muscles, they are not working properly, we also saw that it helps on in movement while walking on flat ground. So it also helps maintain the upright posture. So if they are paralyzed due to whatever reason, so the gluteus maximus muscle alone cannot help you stand in an erect position. So you're most likely to fall. So I'm sure everybody has done this at one point or the other. When you kick the back of your friend's knee, so what you're doing is you're hitting at a point on the muscle or the point of insertions of these muscles such that they fall forward. So you're actually inactivating their hamstring muscles. So I'm sure everybody has done this. So the reason they're called hamstring muscles, I'm sure you'll understand by now, is that this is the area from which pigs are hung in all these butchering shops. Okay, and it was actually a characteristic thing that enemy soldiers were done to, right? So they would slash off the hamstring muscles of the enemy soldiers and also their horses, so to make sure that they could not escape. Interesting facts there. So now we're going to cover the sciatic nerve right now, which is the chief nerve of the back of the thigh, right? So an interesting trivia about it, it's the thickest nerve of the body with 1.5 to 2 centimeter thickness at the start. Then it arises from this, it has to arise from a particular nerve plexus, right? We've already studied the brachial plexus. So in this case, it arises from the sacral plexus. And it happens to have two parts, which is the tibial part and the common peroneal part. So the tibial part we've come across with hamstring muscles, whereas the common peroneal part we saw was supplied the short head of the biceps femoris. So the tibial part, here is something interesting. So the tibial part is VV, very, very important, right? Ventral division of ventral rami, because the hamstring muscles are very, very important. So the tibial part supplies the hamstring muscles. So it is very, very important. So ventral division of ventral rami of L4, L5, S1, S2 and S3, which is why it's also important, right? Now, if we consider the common peroneal part, which is DV, which is going to be don't worry, right? So it's going to be L4, L5, S1 and S2, but not S3. So do you see where I'm going with this? I'm sorry, it's a very lame joke, but the common peroneal part is don't worry, dorsal division of ventral rami, because you don't have to worry, L4, L5, S1, S2, but not S3. Now let's take a look at the course of it. So it arises in the pelvis in front of the piriformis, right? But then it enters the gluteal region below the piriformis through the greater sciatic foramen. We know that there is a greater sciatic foramen and a lesser sciatic foramen, which is formed by the various ligaments. Okay. which are getting attached onto the hip bone. Now it enters the gluteal region through the greater sciatic foramen. Now it has to enter the back of the thigh. So it does so by passing between the ischial tuberosity and the greater trochanter. Let's try to visualize this. Here we have the ischial tuberosity and here we have the greater trochanter. Now it's going to enter such that it passes here, right? Sorry, here. Now the vent is below the piriformis, right, through the greater sciatic foramen. It's going vertically downward, and here just above the popliteal fossa it's dividing into two. That is the tibial part and the common peroneal part. Now we finished with the course. Now let's take a look at the relations of the sciatic nerve, which is very important. Now here we locate the sciatic nerve, which is below the piriformis, right? Now first let's consider the one superficial to it. Now if we look at this illustration and if we also visualize it, we know that the biggest muscle there, which is covering all these other muscles, is the gluteus maximus, right? So this is going to be the first one. Then it is covering gluteus medius and minimus as well. So gluteus maximus, right? So we have the gluteus maximus, we have the gluteus medius and minimus as well. The piriformis, below which we have the sciatic nerve. So the deep relations. So first you have the body of the ischium here. Okay, so body of the ischium, which is the first one. We are going to look at it above downward, by the way. Then we have the obturator internus with the gemelli. Now I'll try to put it in different color just so that you guys can visualize it. So the gemelli, superior gemelli, the inferior gemelli. Okay, and in between that in red we have our friend obturator internus. Now above downward, so far we've had the body of ischium, we have had the obturator with the superior and inferior gemelli, then we have the quadratus femoris, and the fourth one is going to be the adductor magnus muscle. So we discussed the back of the thigh, which has the hamstring muscles and the sciatic nerve. The hamstring muscles consist of, I hope you're saying it with me, semimembranosus, semitendinosus, biceps femoris, only long head, adductor magnus, only ischial head. And what do they have in common? First thing is they all arise from the ischial tuberosity. They're all inserted into one of the bones of the leg. They're all supplied by the tibial part of the sciatic nerve, and they all are chief flexors and weak extensors of the hip joint. The sciatic nerve we know has the tibial part and the common peroneal part. The tibial part is very, very important. That's why it has L4, L5, S1, S2 and S3. That is ventral division of ventral rami. Whereas the common peroneal is, don't worry, that is it has a dorsal division of the ventral rami. And that's why it has L4, L5, S1 and only S2 but not S3. So thank you for watching. Have a nice day.